night, this past Friday, he had a debate with a Zionist in Cape Town, Mark Oppenheimer, and he practically showed us how to dismantle all of those arguments. So for those who haven't watched it, I suggest you go and watch that debate. And for those of us who want to learn how to do the same thing in a conversation with a Zionist, then Sheikh Abdullah is here to teach us. The way the program will commence is that we're going to start now, inshallah, for about an hour. Then we'll have a 10-minute tea break till about 12 o'clock. Then we'll continue again from 12 to 1. At 1 o'clock, we'll break for Salah and lunch. And then we'll continue again from about 2:15 to 3:30, inshallah. So those will be the three main sessions. Sheikh Abdullah will start now with an introduction. Unfortunately, we just need the adapter to get his slides on board. But in the next 5 minutes, that will be here. And then he'll start with the main presentation, inshallah. Sheikh Abdullah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام نبي كريم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين وصحبه الصالحين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. It's my pleasure to be here with you today in South Africa, a very interesting country, a very interesting history, especially about the issue of Palestine. I want to tell you about when we think about Zionism. We think about, let's look at the narrative that you hear. There were a bunch of people who have been persecuted in Europe. They go to another land to find freedom from persecution, make up their own state. But in this new land, there is already an indigenous native population that already lives there. And these people say, well, because we were persecuted and because we come from Europe, so we're kind of Europeans and we have a more superior civilization and we know more things. This is their argument. We have a right to rule over this land, the land that we're coming to, and we're going to control the natives because that's the only way they can be civilized. They can't be given their own right to rule. We have to conquer them, control them. And when we have a democracy, we can't give them equal rights because they don't know how to rule themselves. Now, you might think, oh, this sounds very familiar, being a South African, isn't it? This is a very interesting country to have this discussion with. This is the exact argument of the Boer, and I'm pronouncing it properly. In English, we call it Boer, but apparently no one understood it here. Like, well, who's the Boer? All right. So it's the Boer. They argued the same thing. They belonged to a particular Christian sect. They were being persecuted in the Netherlands under, I think it was the Spanish control, the Habsburgs control. So they left Europe to come to seek a free place for themselves. And they found it in South Africa, quote unquote, at the expense of the freedom of the native population. But you know what? This is not the first time we've heard this. Because the way that the Zionists will argue is they'll say that, you just don't like us, these native peoples, and they even try to deny them being native. They don't like us, and so they are racist against Jews. That's why they oppose Zionism, which is the same thing as saying to the native population in South Africa, you don't like the apartheid state because you hate white people. That's why. It's not because you don't have equal rights. No. It's because you just hate white people. Right? You just want to kill white people. And funnily enough, the guy that I was debating, Mark Oppenheimer, on Friday, he was famous. He's a lawyer, as you know. He's famous for being a lawyer that was part of a prosecution, attempted prosecution of ANC party for the chant, kill the Boer, right? That's what. So he said this is this is a call to genocide against white people here, even though no one understands it like that. It's like a metaphor. It was from a time where it's against the system. So this was what was argued, and the ANC won their case in court. Does everyone know that court case? Were you aware of this case? Okay. So if you think, by the way, that this is a unique argument that the Zionists make, obviously you know it's not, because the ANC, the National Party, the white nationalist National Party, they made the same kind of arguments that you just hate white people. You want equal rights? Well, no, that's just, you want to create a genocide of our people, or a cultural genocide of our people, right? They actually argued this. And I've quoted South African, the National Party, many times in my debates in England, because we still know in England about the apartheid regime and the Free Nelson Mandela campaign and so on. This was when England and the West was more towards, freedom in South Africa. But during the Cold War, when it was Soviet Union and the West, they were supporting the white apartheid regime, which used to say, if you don't support us, the communists will spread throughout Africa. We're the only ones defending, we're an outpost of Western civilization in the barbaric lands, and we're the ones that are resisting communism. Guess what? Zionists say the same thing. Benjamin Netanyahu says exactly the same thing, right? Get that brother some coffee. He seems to be falling asleep. Had a long night, huh? All right. Anyway, so interestingly, every colonialist makes the same argument. When they called the Pilgrims came to North America in the 1600s, the white Pilgrims, they were leaving England. England was not a tolerant place back then. The Church of England was not a tolerant church. So these were following a sect of Christianity called the Anabaptist or Anabaptism, and they left England to escape persecution, and they went to Africa, North America, and they said that it's time to come here to spread Christianity, but more specifically to set up a new civilization for ourselves where we can have freedom, and we have to control the natives population because they're barbaric. And and what was funny was back then they used to say, look at the natives, how barbaric they are. Look, they show they show most of their bodies. They don't have clothing that covers themselves. They're not modest, right? They're not modest. And maybe I think the Boers, and correct me if I'm wrong, would say the same thing about some African tribes and others. That look, they're not modest, right? We are modest, right? They're not. Then that's barbaric. Now it's the other way around. Oh, look at the Muslims. They're so barbaric. Look how they cover up, right? Right. So if you're uncovered, you're barbaric, and if you're covered, you're barbaric. There's no way of winning. You can't win that. So the North Africa, the Pilgrims that went to North America said the same argument. The French, when they were colonizing Algeria, again, they were moving French people into Algeria to colonize it directly. And they didn't even say it was a colony of France. By law, they declared it to be France. It was literally France. But Algerian Arabs and Muslims were denied citizenship and denied the right to vote. So we see the same thing again. But similar to maybe the South African Boer apartheid regime, they divided the people into different races. So when the French came to Algeria, they said, okay, the Algerian Jews will treat differently, and the Algerian Muslims will treat differently. And they even said, because the Algerian Jews were small in number, and maybe because of lobbying from French Jews, they were given French citizenship. So Algerian Jews were given French citizenship, but Algerian Muslims were not given French citizenship. And so they fought a campaign against the French, right? They had their version, you could say, of Umkhonto Msizwe, if I'm pronouncing it properly. I'm mispronouncing it, but I apologize, right? But you know which group I'm referring to, right? So they had their own versions of this, fighting against the French. Now, I'm not sure if the French said that they're being attacked because these people are racist, but they certainly said these are barbarians, right? They don't like us because we are civilized. That's the usual argument. The Italians did the same thing in Libya as well, but it didn't work. So in all these cases, people fought against the colonizer, and eventually now everyone supports this. Everyone supports. Now it's done, of course. Now everyone supports it. Back then there was a strong population of the French said, don't leave Algeria, it's ours. Strong population of French, right? So this is what history has shown us. But there's also another interesting quirk of history. And I'm just giving you this knowledge because this is for us to enable to argue against Zionists when they say, you oppose Zionism because it's the only Jewish state on the world. You don't like Jews to have a state. That's why you oppose it. There's no other reason. There's no other possible reason you can oppose it. So I'm going to give you another example, and then I'm going to tell you how to answer that argument. So there was in North America, there was slavery in the United States of America. So they had instituted slavery, and then in the mid 1800s, they had a civil war, and they banned slavery across North America. Well, not entirely, but that's a different discussion. So they banned officially slavery across North America, and there was a discussion in the southern states. So there was the North states versus the southern states in the United States. The southern states had slavery. The northern states had abolished it earlier, and because they had relied on industrialization, they'd industrialized. So for them, it wasn't, you no longer needed slavery, basically. And they also worked out that it was more economical to pay someone, even if you pay them a little bit of money, but they're more motivated than someone that is just doing it to avoid the whip. So they abolished slavery, despite there were some people, Christians making, well, I want to say some Christians, some sects of Christianity, the Anabaptists, are not a branch of the Anabaptists, the Quakers and others, they were making arguments against slavery. Most Christians were making arguments for slavery, right? They said this is the curse of Ham, right? This is where the Africans are basically the children of Ham, the biblical figure, you must have heard of him, and that they are, as part of the curse on Ham, his descendants, this applies to the people of Africa, so they should be, it's okay for them to be enslaved. This is part of God's curse. So the majority of Christians at one point were all making arguments for slavery, and I think in South Africa as well, right? The Boer Christians were making the same arguments, right? So yes, for unequal rights and what have you. Okay, so then eventually slavery is abolished, and the people in the South said, look, we have very big populations of African-descended Americans, right, or African descendants. We can't live with them. We're different races. We can't live with them. They're going to be called genocide. They're going to be called criminals and a whole bunch of things. So there were a portion of these African Americans who agreed that they can't live with their former oppressors. They agreed with this, and they said, "Okay, send us back to Africa. We want a land in Africa. Send us back there. We will have our own independent state." So a land was selected for them in West Africa to go. It's now called Liberia, if you've heard of it, right? Liberia. Now, Liberia, the African Americans, this is like, they've been there now for, 200-300 years. They don't know what tribe they were from. They don't know what original language they spoke. They only knew English. And they had adopted some of the customs, well, of course, of the white Americans, right? So that's what they grew up with. So they were no longer, you could say, you couldn't trace them particularly to any West African region or area. They were disconnected. Most people would have said that at this point in time, they're a new ethnic group, right? Because that's how ethnic groups are created. They move, they change, they become something else. You don't say, let's move you back to where you were 300 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, or in the case of the Zionist argument, 2,000 years ago, right? But anyway, so they go to Liberia, and I don't know if any of you know the history of Liberia. It's pretty shocking for people who don't know. Liberia, they came to Liberia with the same mentality Zionists had. So the native population in the area, so the area of the land, no one consulted the people there to make a country called Liberia and give it to these African Americans coming to West Africa. No one consulted them. When they arrived, the official language is English, not the native languages. And they bring Western customs, Western ruling systems, everything down there. And they give voting rights only to African American immigrants, not to the native population. And they said, we can't give it to native population. They're uncivilized. We are the civilized people, and we should rule them, and we should dictate to them. And this caused problems in Liberia, as you know, uprisings and civil wars. And so only now does everyone have equal rights and right to vote in Liberia. But before not, because of these immigrants coming from a Western country, yes, they have ancestry there, of course, but it's so disconnected. But more importantly, they don't have a better right to rule the people than the people that never left and were always there. That is the key argument you have to remember. So now going to Zionism. So the European Jews started Zionism. You know, when I was debating Mark Oppenheimer, I just call him Mark now. When I was debating Mark, he's very sly, very cunning in this argument he made. He said that, well, you say Israel is a European colonial state, but if you go there, you look at the Jews in there, they're from all over. They're from the Middle East. You know, like a lot of them are from the Middle East. There are Middle Eastern Jews there. It's a mix. It's not just European Jews. So how can you say it's a European colonial project? Now, he relies on you not knowing history, right? Zionists rely on this. And that's why whenever you hear discussions about Zionism, you might hear, refutations of Zionism. You might hear a lot of history being discussed. And people say, why do I need to learn the history? What's going on about the history? Because the history is very important. It refutes their claim. Because I knew very simply, when the state of Israel was established, and for at least 5 years afterwards, it was European Jews only. The European Jews set it up. European Jews came and invaded, in essence, or against, by invasion I mean against the consent of the native population, right? So it was European Jews, or should I say, Jewish Europeans, right? That's how you should actually describe them, because they're Europeans. Why are they not Europeans? Genetic studies on Jewish Europeans have shown, yes, they have some DNA that comes from the Middle East over 2,000 years ago, but haven't been doing nothing in Europe. They've been intermarrying Europeans for centuries and centuries and centuries, to the point that they look like Europeans for the most part, and their DNA is as much ancient European as it is Middle Eastern. So they're as much European as they're Middle Eastern. What gives them the right to rule over a country in the Middle East where everyone is 100% Middle Eastern, and I've always lived there? That is the argument. It's the same argument. You South Africans have the best experience to argue against Zionism, because it's exactly the same. Now you might say, but Abdullah, the Boers couldn't argue that they were coming back home or coming back to their ancestral lands because they never lived here, right? They never lived in Africa, so how can they say this? Well, technically, they kind of can, in a way, because as sociologists and anthropologists have studied and discovered, the European, it works. They discovered that all modern human beings throughout planet Earth have a common origin, or they can trace it to the origins to Africa. That means that technically everyone comes from Africa. They just separate out by 70,000 years, 50,000 years, maybe. That's quite a long time. But hey, if 2,000 years is okay to rewind the clock, why not 10,000 years? Why not 50,000 years? Why not 70,000 years? So the board can argue we're just going back home to our lands, right, where we came from. And that's the ridiculousness of the argument. They argue they have a better right to rule against the people who were always living there. Now, okay, let me just see if I can. Wait, let me. I'll probably have to put it on this side. Okay. Oops. Oh, it's connected up. I mean, unless I take it out and put it on this side, or can I move it this way? Okay, that's fine. Sorry? Yeah. Just untape it. No. That's it. Okay. So this is the history of this is where historical arguments are important when you want to actually engage Zionists. Then, if you point this out, that basically the native population that hasn't left Palestine should have a better right to rule than the people that are newcomers, or at least when I say better right to rule, we can just say at the minimum equal rights, minimum equal rights. Then you'll see the true colors of Zionism come out. They'll say, you want the elimination of the world's only Jewish state, or you want the elimination of of Israel or the Zionist culture, or you want to destroy the regime. And the funny thing was, the National Party made the same arguments. I actually quoted them in a debate, not my previous one, but the one before in England. I quoted the National Party, who made the exact same argument, which you've probably heard. And the reason why the way to refute this very simply is, no one, the white South African party said, the National Party said, you want the elimination of the white people, the white culture, but I don't even think even they said you want the elimination of the South African country. No one wants to eliminate the country. We all live in the country. We want a change of the regime, right? A change of the system. Okay, that is what they want. So likewise, the land of Palestine, the singular, if you had a one state there, you don't want the elimination of a country there. You want a regime change, which gives everybody equal rights in the land of Palestine. Now, there is another argument that the Zionists use, before I go into some of the history, but just so things that just to show you that you are having enough experience to refute this, but you just have to recognize the parallels. So they say, okay, the West Bank and Gaza, we don't control, these are not part of Israel. The Palestinians that live there are not under Israeli state, right? So they're not in Israel, so they don't get equal rights because they're not a citizen of Israel. They're not part of Israel. But yet, Israel controls West Bank. Israel controls Gaza, even if they just withdrew from, but control who goes in and out. So these are not independent states. Israel won't allow it to be independent. They'll just say, we let the Palestinians have autonomy in some disconnected, separate areas, but we control everything. But at the same time, Israeli citizens can go into the West Bank as they want, with no permission or anything. They can go into the West Bank and they can live in settlements and be under Israeli law. Now, you recognize in your history how the South African government managed a large population of the native South Africans without having to declare them citizens. Does everyone know this special legal arrangement they use to say, we're not actually giving two classes of citizenship, right? But black South Africans, they don't get equal rights or what have you, because what? Does everyone know what excuse they used? Sorry? What excuse did they use? What legal fiction did they create to say that they don't have to give native black South Africans equal rights? Sorry? Well, they had skin color, but they had something else. They had a different idea. They said that you're not actually citizens of the South African state. Right? You're not citizens. How do they make you not citizens? Oh, the native population. Sorry? Language, well, I mean, you can go to any country and speak any language you want, I suppose. And you can be a citizen. No, but you guys know, what did they do? Where did they put you? Where did they put, or what did they declare was in the lands where there's majority native peoples? Did they say that was part of South Africa? No, what did they call it? A Bantustan, right? Yeah, separate homelands. Yeah. So they said that you're not actually in South Africa, the apartheid regime, South Africa. You're in a separate land, a separate state, and they made all these small states. And they, you could come if you have a work permit to do work, but you have to be out of the white areas by a certain curfew. I think that was at one point, and I'm not sure how it varied from time to time, but they put a curfew. Guess what? That's exactly what's happened in Israel. If you're a Palestinian in the West Bank or Gaza, you can have a permit to work, but you have to prove you have a job and you're employed somewhere by an Israeli employer or boss. You might be permitted to go into the land of Israel. When I say the land of Israel, I mean the internationally recognized political fiction called Israel. You can go in to work, but you have to be out by a certain curfew time, right? So you South Africans know exactly what that looks like, right? You lived it, right? For those of you now, I don't know, some of you are young, so maybe you don't remember it, but if you don't remember it, ask your parents, right? Ask the more mature audience members here, because they remember it very vividly. So this is why South Africa is one of the best places, I think, to refute Zionism, and why I'm not surprised that the South African government took Israel to the International Court of Justice for genocide, because they recognize this. All right, and Nelson Mandela spoke about this, as you are probably aware, right? So the Zionists will say to you that they don't, West Bank and Gaza are not Israel, so they don't have to give people equal rights. I say, okay, then why do you control it? So make your mind up. Is it Israel? If it is, give everyone equal citizenship and equal rights. If it's not, leave it. Right? Because if you're saying it's not, then you must leave it. You can't say we control it, right? And with no right to it. Okay. But even then, that's not what you don't know about Palestine and the so-called land of Israel is that actually they do have two classes of citizenship. In East Jerusalem was part of the West Bank, but Israel kind of annexed it in a way. They made it under law part of the state of Israel. But there were Palestinians living in East Jerusalem, West Bank Palestinians. So what happens to them? Okay, are you given now citizenship, passport, equal rights? No, you're given permanent residency, right? Permanent residency. So, and now a Zionist, remember, Zionists very cunning, right? They're very clever. So they're going to say to you, well, what's wrong with permanent residency? Every country has, permanent residency, permits and documents and things. So why not this in the state of Israel? Not everyone has to be a citizen there. Some have permanent residency. You have in South Africa, you have in America, you have in England. And I say, yes, of course, that's true. But for who? For immigrants. They come in, right? And they start out not as citizens. They move into the land with permission, and they're given permanent residency. Did the Palestinians move there from anywhere else? Did they move there? No. So then you give them permanent residency is a second class of citizenship. Right, second class of citizenship. So you have to know how to argue this, because they're very cunning, very sly, and I say this based on the arguments that they are. Their arguments are sly, so I conclude they are sly. And you have to know this. They'll be very duplicitous. Okay. Did you know that, you must have heard about the war in Ukraine, okay? What do you know about the war in Ukraine? How did it start? How did it start? The Ukraine war. As in, did Ukraine invade Russia? Is that how it started? How did it start? No, there was no American bases there to annex part of Russia. No, do you know? Okay, who fired the first shot? Russia. And where did they fire their shot? Where did they Were they just on their side of the border and just like shooting and staying there? What did they do? Are there any Russian soldiers in Ukraine? Maybe. You don't know if there are any Russian soldiers in Ukraine? The whole point, you can't have a war in Ukraine if there's no invasion army. It takes an invasion army to start a war in the land, maybe. You guys need to read up on this stuff. It's very important. Go ahead, brother.
Ukraine. Yes, and then the NATO people, they make friend with Ukraine. So meaning now the president of Ukraine, of Russia, they say because you giving our enemies access to enter, because Russia and Ukraine, they're brothers, meaning they together. So meaning now if Russia is an enemy of America, and Ukraine make friend with America, it's easy for the American to access Russia when they're coming to Ukraine. So I think that's where the problem starts.
I know, but who started the war?
Who started the war is
the fighting. Who launched the fighting? Who moved into whose area or land?
Is NATO was a problem because Ukraine and
no,
Russia,
I mean who started it? Like who? Like the war. So you have a reason to start a war, and then you have the war itself.
Yes.
So what started the war itself? So did Ukraine launch an invasion army into Russia? Did the Americans invade into Russia?
No.
What happened?
No, Russia started to give a shot to Ukraine because Ukraine, they were the exit of the NATO to come to attack Russia. So meaning,
NATO doesn't. There was no invitation to attack Russia. But Russia said that you're inviting NATO to be a NATO member.
Yes.
It was because Ukraine wanted to be a member of NATO.
Yes.
That Russia said this was a provocation.
Yes.
Because you're bringing NATO right up to its borders.
Yes.
NATO doesn't have any clause that says it must attack. The NATO clause is if you attack one country, you attack all the countries. So Russia said that simply Ukraine joining NATO was a provocation. And then the war started when Russia moves its tanks into Ukraine. I mean, that's the most, that was the obvious thing I was looking for, guys, right? So Russia starts the war, invades into Ukraine, right? You know that Russia declared that Ukraine, because Putin, the president of Russia, he started to cite history. He said Ukraine is actually where the Russian people started from, which is kind of partly true, actually. So he said, we're going back home, right, to control Ukraine. But also, do you know when he conquered areas of Ukraine, and there were Ukrainian people in those areas, right? Do you know what he did to those Ukrainian people? Even if they didn't like Russia, they hated Russia. Do you know what he did to them? You know what he did to them? He gave them Russian citizenship and passports. Because if you conquer a land and you say it's part of your land, right, you'd give the people there your citizenship, right? Right, so even Putin, when he conquers, sure. So even the president of Russia understands the principle that if you say this land is yours and you conquer it, you give everybody equal rights. You give everybody equal rights. He said the Ukrainians were cousins. The Ukrainians were cousins of the Russians, right? Because they have a shared ancient ancestry. But the Palestinians who live on the land and are natives, there was many genetic studies that have shown they found dead bodies of ancient Canaanites. The land used to be called Canaan or Canaan. And they found 4,000-year-old dead bodies. So they got the DNA from these bodies and they compared it to the people that live there today. So the people that were most closest to them, about 70% match, more or less, sometimes between 90 to 70% match to 4,000-year-old Canaanite bodies was the Palestinians, right? Not surprising, okay? Then but after them, it was Middle Eastern Jews. And right at the very bottom, maybe 30% match to them is European Jews, okay, on average. So the Palestinians and the Jews, many Jews, have a common ancestry in some of their ancestry. But Jewish Europeans, that's only one half on average of their ancestry. The other half is European, ancient European connection. From ancient European DNA, 50% match. So they're as much Europeans as they are Middle Easterner. They can't be selective and say, oh, well, I'm Israeli when I want to be. I'm Middle Eastern when I want to be. But when it comes to, and I'll end on this before we break. Recently, I don't know if you saw the news reports, there were many Israelis who descend from Spanish and Portuguese Europeans claiming citizenship in Portugal. They were applying for citizenship in Portugal. Okay? And there was also a campaign, maybe about 15 years ago, I think, for Jews that were in Spain that were kicked out to be given Spanish citizenship because that's where they lived there. So that was where they were from. They have a right to be citizens. So when these Jewish Europeans, many of them have double nationalities. They could be German, American, English, but also Israeli. So when they want, they can be European or Western. And when they want, they can claim we're Middle Eastern, we belong there. But the Palestinians can't claim that they even belong to the same land and being given citizenship in the land they live in. See, that is how you argue. And once you argue these things, once you make this very clear, then you see the Zionist racism come out, right? That Jews have a better right to the land of Palestine. So then really, with my debate against Mark, I decided to call Zionism by its true name, right? It's Jewish racial supremacy, right? It doesn't mean over the whole world, but if there's any area of land where Jews are not the majority, if you're not the majority in a democratic system, then yes, as long as you have equal rights and the right to vote, that's all you can ask for. You can't ask for more. If you say, I'm the minority, but we have a right to rule this land against the majority because of our race, this is racial supremacy, right? And so Zionism, if in debates, instead of using the word Zionism, if you like, first explain to whoever you're talking to, whether it's on a dawah stall or in a public debate on TV, wherever you're going to find yourself, who knows where you could find yourself. You say, what does Zionism mean? It doesn't mean a state for Jews anywhere in the world. Okay, go America, ask for a little area of land. Fine, no problem. You know, tafaddal, we'll help you. Right? If America voluntarily gives it to you, no one has a problem. Right? If Argentina gives it to you, and this was what Zionists were initially looking for before they created the state of Israel, they're looking for some land. But then many of them said, no, it's Palestine. It must be Palestine. That's our history. That's where our Bible talks about. So we want to go there. If they say, no, it's because of our race or ethnicity or what have you, that we have a better right to rule that land than the natives, this is an argument for racial supremacy. Simple as that. So call it by what it is. Call the beast by what it is, as they say. Anyway, we'll break. We'll have a little break now, inshallah, and we'll reconvene in, I don't know how long, 10 minutes or, yeah, in 10 minutes, inshallah, and then we'll continue. Okay, let's reconvene, everybody, and get started. So, alhamdulillah, now we have the slides that can be viewed by everybody. We can discuss it. Let's, is everyone okay? Just settle down, and we'll restart. So, I started this presentation with really just telling you that it's not really a complicated debate. It's quite simple. But Zionists, the advocates for Zionism, they're not stupid, and they're not dumb. They're clever, otherwise they wouldn't be advocates. And they are going to cherry pick certain histories, cherry pick certain things, and spin it in a way to make you think something else, right? So they'll say things like, when I debate Mark, it's not a genocide in Palestine, because if Israel wanted to, it could eliminate all the Palestinians very quickly, therefore it's not a genocide. That's like me saying, that's as silly and as stupid as saying, the Nazis didn't intend to genocide the Jews, because for most of the, or at least the most of their rule of Germany, including into the Second World War, the beginning of Second World War, they were mostly calling for Jews to leave Germany, and they were letting them go, or they were expelling them from Germany, right? Moving them out. So if the Nazis wanted to kill all Jews, why would you let them go, right? That's the stupidity of that's how it sounds. That's the stupidity of it, because genocide doesn't mean you want to kill every single person. It means you want them away out. And genocide is a tool you can use to get them out, to get people you don't want out, unfortunately, by some of these nasty people, their nasty logic, right? According to their nasty logics. So genocide is used as a tool, not as an end, not as the objective, but as a method to get what you want, which is to remove people you don't want. This is the thinking of criminal minds. And so the Zionists want in Israel, the Israeli government has expressed they're going to kill as many Palestinians as is required, civilians, make their life unlivable in Gaza, kill them, terrorize them, bomb them. So you're targeting civilians now. This is genocide, right? Because the official definition of genocide is the destruction of an ethnic group in whole or in part. All right, that's important. So Israel doesn't want to kill all the Palestinians, because if it did, America, the people in America would go like, this is what, we didn't support this. This looks just like the Holocaust. So they can't do it explicitly or openly like that. They have to do it in a controlled way, where they can always give a different explanation for what they're doing, right? But most modern genocides have been the same way. When the Serbs in Bosnia were genociding the Bosnian Muslims, right? This is in East Europe, okay? Now, Bosnians, they're European Muslims, and they've lived there, for centuries. But the Serbs were, militant nationalists. They said, we need to remove these people from there, and they started to kick them out or kill portions of them. Sometimes they would only kill the men, they wouldn't kill the women and children, but they would rape the women. Some very nasty things. Could the Serbs say, look, if we wanted to kill all the Bosnian Muslims, we wouldn't let the women and children go. We'd kill all of them, right? We didn't kill all of them, so that we know it's not a genocide. That's how stupid it is, right? They even call it, it's actually called the Srebrenica genocide. Srebrenica is a city in Bosnia where a massive massacres happened against the Bosnians. But Bosnians weren't always only living in that city. They were living all around the land. But that city was targeted for cleansing, for ethnic cleansing, removing, right? So genocide has always been used as a method to achieve a goal, not as the goal itself necessarily. Okay, now we're going to get to the history bit, you might say. But some of the history it's going to be useful for what we're going to argue, and I will try to make it mostly about giving you knowledge enough to make arguments for Palestinians. You know, the thing about South Africa was, you know, why I'm assuming the name wasn't changed that much since apartheid, but the name of the country South Africa is always called South Africa in the UN, right? South Africa isn't the name of any particular race or ethnic group. It's just the name of the area of land. The land it's in the south of Africa. We'll just call it South Africa. You know, you can be any particular race. There's no such race of people called this is the tribe of the South Africans or the ethnicity called the South Africans. You have Zulus, you have Xhosas. I'm trying to pronounce it probably. My British accent can't. Still trying to master clicks, but you have Boers now who are obviously living here. You have obviously Malays and so on and so forth. So you have different ethnic groups in South Africa, but Israel, and this is what one brother was asking me just before, and I said, just wait, we were coming into this. The word Israel is the name of a tribe, not the name of a land. Okay, so let's cover that. I'm going to give you some of the history so that you can argue confidently. Because the name Palestine is a name of a land, right? Palestinian means people that live in Palestine, or they are natives to Palestine. Like I'm saying South Africans, okay? South Africans isn't an ethnicity, just the people that lives in the land. So if we're going to talk about a word or a name to describe a land where it's just the name of the land and you can have different races on it, surely the best word would be a ethnic neutral word, a word that doesn't discriminate between religion or background, what have you. So Palestine. But we need to go, and I'm going to now prove to you this, right? Because the Zionists might say, well, you don't know the Bible, you don't know history. So I'm going to now give you that history so you can know exactly what's going on and exactly expose the lies that they tell you. And just before I do this, actually, one last thing. You might say to me, Abdullah, history is in the past. We need to talk about what's happening now. Now is important. The past, what's happening now is most important. But I tell you this, let's say after this session, you go back home. You all go back home to your house and you try to put the key in the lock's been changed. Like, what? What's going on? You know, the windows are shut, you can't get in. And you see there's some other people there. They came into your house while you were away. They kicked out your family. Your family's like outside. They changed all the locks. What are you going to do? And let's take away the option of getting your gun out and start shooting. Right? 'Cause I know South Africans, you all are packing some kind of weapon. So let's take that option off the table, because in England, we don't have guns are banned, so you can't actually. No one's armed except the police or some gangsters, but it's very rare. Okay, so the gun option off the table, what would you do? Okay, so the brother said, go to the police station, right? It's okay, that's it, thank you, bro. Go to the police station. And what would you tell the police? Sorry? You've been locked out your own home. Okay, so then the police, they come with you to the house. They knock on the door. The people open the door. The invaders open the door. And the invaders say, no, this is my house. See, I control the lock. It's my lock. It's my house. What would you do then? Sorry? You go to proof. And what proof would you use? Sorry? A deed or a... Yeah. No. Yeah. Okay. So the brother says, something interesting. I actually never heard anyone bring this up before as well. So usually people say, they'll get the documents, but also you can say the neighbors, which is also accurate. Your neighbors would testify, right? Your neighbors are testifying to what are the neighbors going to be testifying to what they saw that day, as in they saw that there's a family in there and you're outside, or what testimony do you want the neighbors to talk about that day, or sorry, that day after the invaders moved in, or when?
When I go to police station,
Yeah.
Bismillah. When I go to police station, I will report that I think my house is hijacked, first of all. Then they will ask me, why you think your house is hijacked? Then I'll say, look here, I went away. When I'm coming back, there's people there. There's my key, everything I got, but it's not working, and there's a people inside. So the key is a witness to say this is my house. But because now they changed the lockers, then I'm gonna ask the police to ask the neighbors where I stay. Before I even talk far, I'll ask the police to ask the neighbors where I'm staying. So the neighbors will witness to say where I'm staying.
Okay. But if they threw your stuff out, including your documents, they didn't keep your documents. They threw everything of your stuff out, every single thing of yours, documents, papers, and so on, right? You would use the documents, right, as well, yeah, to prove that you met. Guess what? Those documents are historical documents. They talk about the past. I moved here at this date 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I rented this house 10 years ago. Or whenever I moved here 10 years ago, the neighbors are giving a witness to, yes, I've seen this guy here for 15 years, 50 years, whatever, not 100 years, but I've seen this person here for this time. You're asking for historical evidence to back up your current claim. Do you understand? That's where history becomes important, right? Because you have to use history to support your claim now, right? Do you have a question, brother?
Another thing that can add on top of that
Sorry, just go on the microphone, please, brother. Sorry.
will be the bills. The bills will help you to prove. If you don't have like a title deed or something, the bills will help to prove. Because,
Bills, okay, yes,
yeah,
yes.
because of your address
All
and
kinds
stuff.
of documents, yes, yes. So including your bills. Your bills are, again, historical documents about what happened in the last month, the last couple months, who pays, what have you. So that's why I'm not gonna give you a whole history lesson on everything that happened in Palestine, but I'll give you the parts you need to know, and I'll give you a summary that gives you, just so you know the history of the place. Because let's say I've come to South Africa, and I know something about, let's say, Zulu history because of I studied the British Empire and what it was doing and who it encountered. Now, I only know as much of Zulu history as I know that from the time when the British encountered them, because that's what I was reading about that. I don't know what happened before that. And so if I'm ever going to talk about, let's say, the Zulu history and their right to live on the land, I'd have to know the longer history beyond that, right, in order to talk about these things. Same with you in Palestine. I have to introduce you to Palestine in a way, even though I know you know it, but I have to introduce you to it. So, and don't worry, it's not going to be complicated. I'm going to make it nice and easy, right? Very nice and easy, because it doesn't have to be complicated, okay? And what I'm going to do is, when I say things, I'm going to have the evidence up on the projector. These slides will be made available to you after this session, so you don't have to worry about that. I just want you to know, if I say something, I'm not just making it up, okay? I just have the evidence there. You don't need to read all of it, okay? So the first historical name for the land of Palestine that we know of there's two of them. One was the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians. They called the land Ret Jenu, but the one that we have about what the natives called themselves, or at least what their neighbors called themselves, so going to your neighbor testimony, is Canaan, right? The land of Canaan. This is on archaeological evidence of the neighboring lands going back 3,600 years ago. This is the land of Canaan, and the Bible says the same thing. It was called the land of Canaan. So it backs up what is widely known of the land of Canaan. Okay. Now, we found, just to go, let me just actually zoom in on this. So okay, yeah. So we know exactly when there was no state of Israel, right? There was no state of Israel 3,200 years ago. Why do we know this? Why do we know this for absolute certain? It's because the Egyptians were controlling the land of Canaan. It was part of the Egyptian empire, that green bit at the bottom there. So that green bit where modern Egypt is, that is the ancient Egyptian kingdom. The historians call it the New Egyptian Kingdom for the dynasty, but that's ancient Egypt. So the Egyptian Empire controlled Canaan, where you can see Gaza there, right in the middle. And I wonder if the mouse allows you to. Or I can't put my mouse on. Okay, so there's no there's no kingdom of Israel there at that point in time. So what happened? There was a breakdown in the Middle East. There was wars, famine, and so on. And the ancient Egyptian empire retreats from Canaan, giving the Canaanites, you could say, independence. Right? So the Canaanites are independent now from the ancient Egyptians. But that didn't last for long. There was recorded, now we're going to go back to this thing here. So we find the ancient Egyptian record in 1208. This is the Pharaoh Meneptah. He basically, he talks about his great victory in Canaan. He had a military campaign in Canaan. So the Egyptians, they left, but they would do raids or campaigns to suppress or to, ask for tribute money, ask for money, you could say, from the Canaanites. So he talks about his great victory in the land of Canaan, 1208 BC. That's 3,200 years ago. And this is the translation of his talking about his great victory. So he talked about he conquered Libya, he conquered the Hittites, which is where modern day Turkey is, as in he beat them. And then he talks about Canaan, and he says that he has basically really subjugated it, is really heavily defeated it. And then he talks about the different city-states that he defeated, Ashkelon, Gezer, and Yanoam. So he talks about how these are independent city-states in Canaan who he has defeated, and they are either paying him tribute or what have you. But interestingly, you see, in all these cases, the icon, the hieroglyphs that are used for these things, they are the names of a land. So this is the city of Ashkelon, the people of Ashkelon, the city of it, Gezer, Canaan, the land. But then there is the first mention of a people called Israel, who he says he's smashed, he's beaten them, right? And the icon for Israel is not a city name, a name for a city, or a name for a land. The Egyptian icon, after the word Israel, the icon is people, meaning a bunch of nomadic people he encountered, or semi-nomadic people. This means that the Israelites, as encountered here, were not in any particular area. They were nomads. They were moving around. Israel was the name of a people, not of a land. In the Bible, Moses addresses "Hear, O Israel" before they've even left Egypt or in Sinai, right? They're not even in the land of Palestine today, but it says "Hear, O Israel" because it's the Bani Israel, right? The tribe, literally the sons of Israel, who is, of course, Jacob, right? So it's a name for. So we see this. It's not actually a land. It's a tribe. Israel is the name of a tribe, right? I suppose I'm trying to give an example. I mean, excuse my ignorance because I haven't had much time to do research. But the name Zulu refers to the people, right? It's not a name of a land, right? But you might have the land of the Zulus. I'm assuming. Is that correct? Yeah. Please correct me. Yeah, I'm very ignorant on this, but it's the name of a people. Okay, so wherever they are, they're called Zulus. But the land might have different names, or you might say this land is the land belonging to them, for example. So KwaZulu-Natal, but it's the name of the people. So you have a point to make, brother.
I'm not sure, but the name Zulu is the name of the people, and the land is Zululand. That's in the English way, Zululand.
Right.
You actually get that. Zululand. That's an English way, but in Zulu, you don't have it as Zululand. You got the different states and different names.
Right.
But in the English style, it becomes Zululand.
Right. Okay. Thank you, brother, for making that clear. So to reiterate what the brother said, he said that there's no such name as Zululand in Zulu. It was the British that came and said, this is Zulu land, because they saw the Zulus were in this area. So they said, okay, this is Zulu land. So this land is controlled by or ruled over the Zulu peoples, but Zulus themselves have different local names for different local areas of the land that they control, which is usually what is the case in the ancient world. That was usually the case, and in today's world, right? So South Africa is the name of the land, but it has many different peoples in it. England, I'll give you an example, right? So England is actually not the name of the land. England is the name, it means the name ruled over by or controlled by or belonging to the Anglo-Saxons or the English. Hence English, same word, Angleland, land of the Angles and Saxons. But then they just got called just the Angles or Angleland. The name of the land is, what we have surviving is the Roman name, Britannia. Britannia is the name of the land, or the whole, or we call it the British Isles, if you like. But the name of the political jurisdiction or the political area is the Angleland, Scotland, and so on, right? Wales is a funny term, because Wales is actually the old English word for that area. And you know, the English are colonizers in England, by the way. Yeah, they moved from Germany into Britain, and the areas they controlled became England, and they pushed the natives west into modern day Wales, right? But then they called these natives foreigner. These are foreigners, and the name for foreigner in English is Wales, right? Wales. So imagine you live in a country with a name of your people get pushed into an area, and in your own land, you get the area of land that you live in is called foreigner land, right? You're called a foreigner in your own country. So technically, you know, the Welsh people are, you know, that's quite insulting, isn't it? Right? Right. Anyway, their own name for themselves, their land is called Cymru, I believe. Right, that's the name, or Cymru, I think in their native language, Celtic. I'm getting aside, but it's interesting. The historical parallels are quite interesting. Anyway, okay. So Israel is the name of a people, not the name. So here you go. Look, Jacob, right? Jacob. He's renamed. His name is called Israel. So Jacob, the prophet Jacob, alayhi salam. Jacob, in the Old Testament, his name is renamed by God. He's called Israel, as a name. And then his children are called the children of Israel. In Hebrew and in Arabic, Bani Israel, children of Israel. Okay, so they all become Israelites, you might say, right? Descendants of their father Israel, or used to be called Jacob. Instead of calling it Bani Yaqub, I suppose, but you went so Bani Israel. Okay, so Israel is used to refer to the name of the people, not the name of the land. Okay, now where does the word Palestine come from? Right, very important. Why do we use the word Palestine? Well, the word Canaan stopped being used. Right, it stopped being used for a number of reasons, and about 50 years after the first recorded name of Israel, these people being in the land after by the ancient Egyptian record, there was an invasion from Mediterranean Sea by these people called the Sea Peoples, the people from the sea, like Vikings of the ancient world. Right? They came from the sea. We think they came from Crete, which is in Greece now. It's the Greek island of Crete. So they invade into the ancient Egyptian empire. They invade different places. The ancient Egyptians beat them off. They fight off these invaders, and they make a peace deal with the invaders. They say, okay, look, you need and you want new lands. You can settle in one of our former lands that we controlled, where modern day Gaza is, right? And these people were called by the Egyptians the Peleset, right? Otherwise called as the Palash in Hebrew, or what we call today the Philistines, right? The Philistines. So the Philistines they are settled in the land only 50 years after the Israelites are first recorded being there. So the Israelites are invaders into Canaan, and then only 50 years later, these other people came who are also invaders into land of Canaan or Palestine. And they're given land by the ancient Egyptians as a peace arrangement. Right, okay, let's stop fighting. You can have Gaza and 4 other city-states on the coast. Let me try to find a map of this. Right, so this is... Okay, so if you look at the picture on the left, right, if you look down, there's a place called Philistia on the bottom there. So that's where they are settled on the left, right? That's where they were. Now, funnily enough, when the Bible has the Israelites invading into Palestine, into Canaan, and the Philistines are already there, right? The Philistines they encountered them. They already set up in the land of Palestine. They didn't invade later. They already are there. So technically, the Philistines are older. They've lived in the land longer than the Israelites have. But the reason why I mention this, why am I going to go all the way there, is because 2,500 years ago, the earliest known mention of the word Palestine, a Greek historian and traveler, an ancient Greek historian traveler called Herodotus. He travels around, the Mediterranean, and he describes Syria or part of Syria, and he calls it Palestine, right? So he thinks that the area called Palestine today is like a district of Syria, or like, connected to the Syrian area. So he calls it Syria and he calls it Palestine. So this is where we have the first word Palestine coming from, because he goes to the coast of Canaan, he sees the Philistines there. So he just says, okay, this is, Palestina is his translation. It's just this is the land or the Palestine land, or just Palestine, right? So he names it. He's a foreigner, but he names it because this is who he encounters there. And then from that time onward, the Romans and everyone else would just refer to that land as Palestine, because it's the name of the land. Now you might say, Abdullah, that's a foreigner naming the land. Why is that important? Well, because most lands are named by foreigners. Because if you're living in the land, you don't really name it anything, which is where you live, right? It's usually someone who's been from a different land. To distinguish it from there, they'll say, this land, we'll call it this name. So people say, where I'm from, right? Portugal is part of the Iberian Peninsula, right? So Spain and Portugal in that area, right? Iberia is a Greek word for it. It's not the native word, or whatever the native, I don't even know what the native word was. And then the second word for the whole area was called Hispania by the Romans, right? And then the Spanish called themselves that. We are Hispania, which is actually a little bit of an arrogant thing to do, because they don't own all of it, right? Yeah. It's like setting up a country in Africa and just calling it Africa. Like, what? You don't own all of Africa. You can't just call yourself Africa, right? But that's how arrogant it is. Anyway, but that's a little Portuguese-Spanish issue. Okay. Anyway, right? Britannia is called by the Romans. We don't know what the native word for the land is. We don't know. Some people say Albion, but we don't have any old records of what the name would be for the natives. So yes, foreigner calls the land this, but guess what? It's a name of a land, right? It doesn't matter who names it, right? But this is why it could be the second or third name the land has ever had. Maybe the last name that land was ever given. It was the Egyptians called it Retjenu. The natives, or the neighbors at least, called it Canaan, and the Greeks called it Palestina, right? But then that became famous, and then like the Romans called it Palestina, and then everyone called it Palestina, right? That's why all the way up to the time of the British, they called it Palestine, and all the, and then when the Zionists tried to colonize Palestine, they say, where should we go to colonize, get our land? You say Palestine, because that's the only name it has. Right? Israel would be none, but we're Israel. But we want to get Palestine. Yeah. So people say, don't call it Palestine, call it Israel. It's like saying, don't call it United Kingdom. So don't call it Britannia, call it United Kingdom. It's like, it's the same, is it not? It's the same place I'm referring to, right? Even then, United Kingdom is a political name for it. It's not the name of the land. It's just a political name for who controls it or rules it. But technically, you could say England and Scotland or what have you. So that answers the question for you that it was only ever called Palestine after Canaan was dropped as the name. No one called it Canaan anymore, right? That's important for you to know. The land belonging, now the Bible calls it the land of Israel, but that means the land that's ruled over or belonging to. Like, I might come to I don't know if any of you live in like a block of flats or apartment blocks, okay? Maybe you live in apartment blocks. So your apartment blocks might be called, I don't know, peach trees, blocks, or something like Lily Court or whatever. Yeah, we have different names. Name of the block of the ones who built it called it this. So when you give your address, you have to give the name of the building that you're in. Okay, then you might say apartment number 15, or you might say this is this is my apartment. So let's say my name's Ahmed. This is Ahmed's apartment. No one says, oh, don't call it peach trees. Call it Ahmed's apartment. It's like, well, but it's in peach trees. That's the name of the whole building is called this, right? Yes, that's the apartment belonging to Ahmed, as in he owns it or he controls it or he rents it, but it doesn't mean it's the name of the place, right? That's important. So yes, now it's called the land belonging to Israel, or of Israel in the Bible, but it's not the name of the land. Right? That's a very important distinction to make when you argue it. Okay, so now a second point that might be useful. So the Israelites come, they colonize the place, and they have 12 tribes. So they divide up the land into 12 parts, basically. Some of those parts are in Jordan, by the way, and some Zionists today say that Jordan, part of it belongs to them, and Lebanon as well. So some people say that Zionists, the religious Zionists who use the Bible as their guide for what belongs to them, say that they actually want to expand into Lebanon and Syria and Jordan, right? But just so you know how people say, well, the Bible says it belongs to us, so we're going to land that belong to us. They never, if you look on the south, right, in the absolute south, beyond that, and the very southmost tip is a place called Eilat today, right? It's the southern port of Israel. Israel controls this, and let me just find the map to give it to you an example. Is it there? No, I'll just get a modern one. Where is it? The modern state, sorry. Okay, right. So do you see at the very bottom there, the very bottom tip, okay? So that goes, that's where the southern port, you see Israel gone all the way down there. But in the Bible, they never controlled all the way down there, or it was never given, the Bible never says that was given to Israel at all. The past Beersheba, south of Beersheba, the whole southern area was never given to Israel in the Bible. Never stopped them claiming it, right? Because really, they don't really care about getting the Bible's land back. They just care about as much land as possible. Do you understand? Right? Because the Bible says that belongs to the land of the Edomites, right? In the Bible, they belong to the land of Edom. It doesn't belong to anyone else. Get this brother a coffee. He's falling asleep. Brother, take some coffee, inshallah. You're going to fall asleep throughout the whole event. Please, give him a coffee, please. Inshallah, he's very tired. All right, then. So that's just so you know. It's not about the Bible. It's not about Bible. It's about land, right? That's the key issue. Okay, so the next point is I'm going to just go through a bunch of history, but you don't have to worry about it because I'm just going to show you something you need to know. So Okay. Okay. So then you have the land divided into 12 tribes. Eventually, they appoint themselves a king, King Saul, and then after King Saul, it is Prophet Dawood alayhi salam and Prophet Suleiman alayhi salam. And these have a kingdom that lasts roughly about 100 years. And this is the land at its greatest extent. They never actually fully control Gaza or Philistina, but you can see they never really control it. But they basically, this is the land at its maximum extent as one kingdom. This doesn't last long. After Prophet Suleiman alayhi salam, the Bible claims that his son was made the next king, and then he couldn't hold the land together, and basically it then becomes split into two kingdoms, right? The kingdom of Israel in the north, where the 10 tribes of Israel become that one kingdom, and the kingdom of the south, the kingdom of Judah, dominated by one tribe of Israel called the tribe of Judah. That's where the word Jew comes from, by the way. It's the name of their tribe. And, technically, there's also the tribe of Simeon, I believe, also is into them. Okay, so then this doesn't last very long, but the Assyrians come, the Assyrian Empire invades, destroys the north kingdom of Israel, and the Babylonians then come and they destroy the southern part of the kingdom of Judah. And the Babylonians take them as slaves, according to the Bible, and takes them into Babylon to be slaves for the Babylonians. That lasts about roughly 70 to 100 years. And then the Babylonians are conquered by the Persians. And the Persians under Cyrus, I don't know if you heard of Cyrus, he's called Cyrus the Great in the Bible. He comes and he basically gives back, he didn't give back, sorry. He lets the Israelites go back to the land of Palestine. But the Palestine is not independent. It's under the control of the Persian Empire. It's a governorate of the Persian Empire. And what was interesting was that the Jews and Israelites, or whatever you want to call them, they live under Persian rule, and they describe Cyrus the Great as being a just king, a righteous king, right? They say that he's a righteous person. Maybe, some people say, maybe he's Dhul Qarnayn, because one of his symbols of, there's a drawing of him, not but a stone carving, where he's wearing a helmet or a hat that has two horns coming out of it. Allahu Alam, we don't know. Allah knows best who he's referring to. But he doesn't give them independence, right? They are under the control of the Persian Empire, right? But they are, but they're permitted to practice their religion and no problem. That doesn't last too long. Then a couple hundred years later, you see the Alexander the Great. You've heard of Alexander the Great, right? He comes and conquers that land, and then he dies. His generals take over, and Jews are now under, you could say, Greek rule. Well, technically it's Macedonian, but anyway, let's just call it Greek rule for now. And again, no independence. Then there's an uprising under it's called the Maccabean Revolt. I'm not going to go too much into detail. So there's uprising of Jews in Palestine, and they establish the kingdom of Judea there, right? The kingdom of Judea. And the Maccabean Revolt, as it's called, it gives them their land back, you could say, quote unquote, as they would describe it. But they only rule it for 100 years until the Romans come. So you can see that a lot of their history, that land has been controlled by different empires, not them. And if you add it all together, Israelites and Jews and so on, if you add all of the time they actually ruled the land was actually only about 600 to 700 years. Right, that's the maximum time they ruled over the land. And then there was an uprising in 70 CE. This is 70 years after the alleged birth of Jesus. Right, the Jews have an uprising against the Romans, and it was destroyed, or not destroyed, suppressed. The temple of Solomon is destroyed, and the Romans take all the gold and they build the Roman Colosseum in Italy with that. You know the Colosseum in Italy, right? They build it with the gold they got from the Jewish temple, the Temple of Solomon. Now this is 70 CE. Benjamin Netanyahu, he argues that 70 CE was when the Romans, they kicked out all the Jews. They were forced out of their land. They were taken as slaves and they were forced out of their land. So they're exiles. There's two things I want you to know about this. So it's 70 CE of the Common Era or the Christian era, really, right? So that's false. Yes, he took slaves. The Romans took slaves. And yes, they took some of the leaders. They killed people. But the vast majority of the people, the Jews that were in Palestine, were left in Palestine. They never went anywhere else. They stayed there. We know this because there's two more rebellions that happen afterwards. You can't have a rebellion from a people that don't live in the land anymore, right? You can't have a rebellion from emptiness, right? You know, maybe an atheist will come and say, you can have a rebellion from nothing. Right? But you need to have people there to exist to do the rebellion, right? So there's two more rebellions that happen, and they're all brutally suppressed. We know that even after this, there are historians like Avi Yonah, who's a Jewish historian. He talks about the Jews of Palestine. He has a book called The Jews of Palestine, A Political History. And he mentions that even after all the rebellions, all of them, there were still 800,000 Jews living in Palestine. So the Jews that were outside of Palestine, that were taken as prisoners and so on, yes, they were taken prisoners, but Jews were still living in Palestine in large majorities. And there's records of Jews, records of Rome, the capital of the Roman Empire, having at least around 20 to 40,000 Jews, about approximately 50 to 100 years before the first revolt, for the first rebellion of the Jews there. Who were they? They were economic migrants. They want, it's the capital of the Roman Empire. If you want, you want to have a better life, you want to have money, you want to have new opportunities, you go there. They went there, they left, no one kicked them out. There were Jews living in Europe in significant numbers before the rebellion of Jews in the kingdom of Judea, right, under Roman occupation. So that means that most European Jews are probably there because their ancestors were migrants that moved there. They weren't kicked out there, and they weren't kicked out. Now, this is the key point, which is if they were migrants and they weren't kicked out, you can't say that you were exiled from the land. And even also, by the way, eventually the Jews they got emancipated from slavery. So they weren't always slaves in the Roman Empire. They never went back to Palestine. They stayed. Because if you live in the Roman Empire, you can go anywhere you want, right? Within the Roman Empire. Like South Africa. If you're a citizen in South Africa, you can go anywhere you want, right? You're not prohibited from anywhere. Well, not anymore, right? Yeah. Well, if you're a Jew living in the Roman Empire, you can go anywhere you want. But then for at least now 700 years, they don't go back to Palestine, the Jewish Europeans. They like where they are staying. They enjoy life. They never go back, right? There was no prohibition. Now, there was only one prohibition that the Romans implemented, only one, which was as a punishment for rebellion, Jews were not allowed to go to Jerusalem anymore. Right? They changed the word Jerusalem to something called Alia Capitolina, but the Jews were not allowed to go to Jerusalem. You can go anywhere else in Palestine, but you can't go to Jerusalem as a punishment, right? Do you know who let the Jews back into Jerusalem? Al-Quds. Do you know who let the Jews back in? Does anyone like to tell me who abolished the Roman prohibition and let Jews back into Jerusalem? Omar, the Khalifa, right? He conquers the Romans and he lets the Jews back into Jerusalem. We let the Jews back into Jerusalem, Muslims, right? Not the Christians. Christians had banned them because the Roman Empire became Christian and they still banned them, right? We let them back in, right? People don't often mention that. Anyway, another refutation of the fact that they say, well, Jews were kicked out of the land was that in this land, after the rebellions, the Jewish books of fiqh and usul and so on, the Talmud, right? It's called the Jerusalem Talmud. It was compiled in Palestine. How can you have a Talmud compiled in a land with no Jews? Right? Because to have it compiled, you must have ulama, right? You must have your scholars there, right? How can you have ulama of your Jewish ulama there when there's no Jews? Right? So, like, explain that. Explain that. This is like 400 years, or at least you could say 330 years after the first rebellion. It's still a center of learning for Judaism. So no one kicked them out, right? That's a key issue. But also something else. There's a second point, which is, well, what happened to the Jews that were living there? Right. So the Roman Empire turns the land into a province. It's called Syria-Palestina. Right? They call it Syria-Palestina. They divide it up into 3 smaller districts: Palestina 1, Palestina 2, and Palestina 3 is really is in the south. They divide up into those 3 districts, and it remains more or less that way until the Muslims conquer and kick out the Romans. I know there was a brief issue where the Persians had reconquered the land, which is mentioned in the Quran, when they had conquered the Romans and they'll be pushed back. But anyway, that's a different point. It was controlled by the Romans until the Muslims came. When the Muslims came, they discovered that most people there were Christian. Right? Or at least most people there were Christian. There were still significant Jews there, but most were Christian. Do you know where these Christians come from? They weren't Romans. I mean, they were under Rome, but they weren't Romans. Sorry?
Arab Christians.
Arab Christians. Yes, there was a significant degree of Arab Christians, but now called Arab Christians. But these Christians many of them their ancestors had converted from Judaism to Christianity. We know this because we can see synagogues stop being used as synagogues at a certain point in time due to archaeology, and they become churches, right? So, and then now Arabs have always been around that area, by the way. This is another point, right? Arabs. But Arabs can refer to 2 kinds of people, right? It can refer to people who are from Arabia. They just move around and they're from Arabia, so Bedouins and others. Or it can refer to people who are natives to a different land, but they start speaking Arabic as their first language. If you start speaking Arabic as your first language, your people get called Arabs. So the Egyptians are called Arabs today, but they come from the pharaohs. They're not from Arabia, right? North Africans are called Arabs, even though their DNA is mostly Amzigh, as it's called, or Berber, the North African peoples. In Nigeria, the north part, controlled by the Hausa, Nigerians call them Arabs, Hausa Arabs, because they speak Arabic. But they're from Nigeria. They're native from the area. They're not from Arabia, right? So Palestinians. Now here's a major point: when the Zionists speak to you and they say these are Arabs, they're colonizers, they come from Arabia, they're not native there. They're wrong on 2 points. One, the Palestinians have always been there. They've intermarried because it's a crossroads of different civilizations. So they've intermarried with different people, but their DNA is, with the studies have shown, they are 70%. So at the most diluted Palestinian, right? The person that has the most different intermarriage in their ancestry, they're still 70% Canaanite, right? From that region. But the interesting thing is, if the Muslims discover that most of these people are Christian, right, and now they're Arabic speakers because now Arabic becomes a common language in the region before the Muslim expansion, right? You had the, what's it called? If you go to Jordan, you see there were Arabic kingdoms in the region before the Muslims arrived there, right? You see in the south, Bedouins living there for thousands of years. The Bible even mentions that in the area on the south of that area, and when you have they call it the Naqab Desert, or they call it the Negev Desert. Arabs have been there for centuries, thousands of years as Bedouins, because it's just desert, and they've, people don't really establish civilization there. They just, they leave it for the Bedouins. So there's always been Arabs. Even the Bible mentions there's Arabs in the south down there, right? So because Arabs have been nomadic peoples, they go different places and areas. So there's always been Arabs in modern day Israel, quote unquote, as they call it. But also the Jews that were there, that never left, they became Christian. And when Islam came there, after 700s, or sorry, just before 700, they started to become Muslim. To the point that Palestinians today are 90% Muslim, 10% Christian. Right? So they didn't all convert to Islam, right? But they descend from Jews or Israelites or whoever there. Now, we think, scholars reckon that what the Israelites did was, why Jews today have some Canaanite DNA is because when the Israelites came in, they massacred the men, women, and children, but except young women that were not married, women that had not been married. So in those women, they took them as slaves and had children with them, making their children become half Canaanite, and then so on and so forth. So maybe that DNA came in via that way. But they massacred the people in that area. Now, this brings me to something else which is quite shocking for you guys. No one has used this argument before except me. I don't know why. Right? I don't know why. So you get to use this. It is hilarious. It is ironic and funny, right? So how long have European Jews been in Europe, if you've been paying attention? How long have they been in Europe? Jewish Europeans. So let's say from the time of 70 CE, that's when their exile time. Let's just take that as a time. Till now, do some maths. 70 CE till now. Sorry? Not 500, but close to 2,000 years. Yeah. So 2,000 years they've been in Europe, okay? Since they said they were kicked out in 70 CE. Now, can anyone do maths and say that from 1200 BC, that's 1,200 years before the 0 year, okay? So we see the Israelites first turn up in that region 1200, okay? So that's before the 0, okay? And then they get kicked out just after that 0, so 70 years after the 0 point, which is meant to be Jesus' birthday, right? When Jesus alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam is born. Can anyone tell me then how long the Jews have been in Palestine then? 1200, so from minus 1200, right, to plus 70, if you want to do that. How long have they been in Palestine? I'm giving you a maths lesson here, sorry? How much? How long? 800. So 1,200, so that's 1,200 BC. That's 1,200 years before Jesus, till Jesus' time plus 70. How much? So 1,200 plus 70 is 1,270. Okay, I think we need a maths course, an IPCI maths course. Okay, I'm joking, guys. I'm just making fun. So, how long have they been in Europe again? How long have they been in Palestine? So, where have they spent most of their time? In Europe. So, they've lived in Europe 800 years longer than they have ever lived in Palestine, or at least, okay, let's say make it accurately 1,900 years, so it'd be 700 years longer. So how they have more entitlement to Palestine against people that have been there for 4, 5, 6, 7, 10,000 years, when they have spent most of their ancestry, because they started out as invaders, remember? They were invaders of Palestine. They're not natives. They're invaders of Palestine. The Bible that they use to make arguments from, though most Zionists or many Zionists are atheists, by the way, But the first Zionists were atheists, by the way. The ones who created the state of Israel are atheists, right? So, but the Bible they use to show this is our history, this is our culture, this is from that region. Their own Bible says they're invaders. And they spent more time ancestrally in Europe than they ever spent in Palestine. Why do they have a right to it more than the natives then? Why are they not more Europeans then? So then you are Europeans. You're more European. You're genetically equally European, but historically you're more European than Palestinian. So why do you have a right to Palestine over the Palestinians? Right? Does that make sense? It's quite shocking, isn't it? Yeah. Did you ever hear that before? Right? It was staring you in the face all this time, right? But it was no one mentions it before. No one ever talks about it. Okay. So the Muslims rule it for approximately 1,300 years, and we're going to get to Europe now. Okay. So before I go into so you might hear that now the Zionists, once you point this out, they have a backup plan. The backup plan is they say, we're persecuted. We were persecuted, so we have a right. But then you can say, this is what the Boers say. This is what the American colonist pilgrims said. This is what the Liberians, the first Liberians said. We were slaves in America. African Americans are treated differently. We're persecuted in a different way due to discrimination and so on, and a whole bunch of things, quite a lot of things. So everyone makes an excuse why they should take the rights of other people. They're saying our rights are taken away where we came from, so we have a right to take away your rights, right? But if everyone is equal, you don't have a right to oppress other people because you were oppressed. A person in a court can't say, you should let me be a rapist because I was raped when I was young, right? That's the ridiculousness. I was raped when I was young, so to feel equal, I need to rape someone else, right? For it to make sense. All the people must be raped like I was, so we could be equal, that kind of stuff, That's the ridiculousness of it, the ridiculous argument that they make. That's how you must argue. That's how you have to argue it. Now, then you might say, hear another Zionist argument. They'll say to you, when you say Zionists, when you criticize Zionists, you just mean Jews, right? That's what you mean. You mean Jews. You don't mean Zionists, right? Well, this is where you can get them on more facts. And you say, why is that? Why are you saying, why would I say that Jews mean Zionists? Not all Jews are Zionists. Yes, but most Zionists are Jews, right? Right? Wrong, right? The total population of Jews in the world is about, I think, if you're at the most generous estimate, about 15 million. I think about 15 million Jews in the world. A Zionist is anyone who believes that Jews should have a right to rule Palestine, right? Do you know who the majority of Zionists in the world are? Sorry? American Christians, Baptists, and others. They're the majority, 30 million of them. The majority of Zionists in the world are Christians. They're not Jews. Usually white Christians too. I noticed when I went to Cape Town that, my opponent had presumably brought people to support him. He couldn't bring many people to support him. Many of them were actually his family, so that's kind of bad, actually. Like, yeah, I've got supporters. Here's my mum. She came with me today, so I got supporters. I got influence. Right? Anyway, so he brought his family members, but there were some people, obviously, that were white-looking, you could say, they weren't Jewish. They were Christians, and they came to support him. Right? So it's these white Christians. So I think Boers are most likely to support Zionism. But that's not just because of a particular interpretation of the Bible, and it's a bid'ah interpretation of the Bible, right? The Christians in the past never believed this. Do you know how I know this? Right? Because the Romans ruled Palestine So after the Romans became Christian, they ruled Palestine for roughly about 300 years. They never let Jews back into Jerusalem. Christians never did. They said, nope. And then the Crusades, when the Crusader Christians came, they found Jews in Palestine. They didn't say, oh, great, this is your place, this is your rule. Let's give it to you, the land. No, they said, I'll give you death, not land. And they massacred the Jews in Palestine. So, and they ruled that land for about 100 years, although if you want to say, like, if you want to go the maximum extent from when they had any territory there, 200 years. But Salahuddin cut most of it short at 100, but there were still some pockets left, and Sultan Baybars came and finished the job 100 years later. So Christians have been ruling that land, let's say 500 to 600 years. And they never had the interpretation to let the Jews back there or bring them there or let them rule. Never, right? So what happened? Different Bible? They never had the same Bible, the same teachings? It was different teachings, different Bible, whatever? No, this was a bid'ah idea that started roughly in the 1700s, but 1800s in Europe, it started to get bigger and bigger amongst Christians. It was an idea that it was partly because of anti-Semitism. They said, we don't like the Jews here. The Jews cause trouble. That's the anti-Semitic mindset they had. So it said maybe, God wants them to go back to their land because they're always causing trouble here. So maybe God wants them to go back to their land. And then they thought, another bid'ah idea they came up with, which is maybe that's why Jesus hasn't come back yet, because he's waiting because Jesus, when he comes, he's meant to convert all the Jews to Christianity, right? According to the Bible, or that's their interpretation of it anyway. Although it doesn't necessarily say that explicitly, that all the Jews will become Christian. When he comes back, he'll massacre anyone who doesn't believe in him, according to the book of Revelation, right? Or as Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad said, when he comes back, no more Mr. Nice Guy, right? Anyway, so basically the Christians never understood this, but they said, okay, maybe we have to send the Jews there so that Jesus can all talk to them when he arrives. So that's what makes him come back, was all the Jews are there, so then he can go and like preach to them and so on, and then they can convert. I mean, technically the Jews had been there for quite a few hundreds of years before, before converting to Christianity. So in a sense, most of the Jews became Christian that stayed there. So you didn't even need Jesus to come back because he's been, because most of them had already converted. But anyway, they said, well, the remainder can only be converted when you all just chuck them back into Palestine, basically, right? So you see Christians, right, like the clergyman Alexander Keefe or Anthony Ashley Cooper. Another one, there's this separate organization, he was the president of the London Society for Promoting Christianity Among Jews, right? And he thought, hey, maybe the best way to convert them is to send them to Palestine and Jesus will deal with it or what have you, make some arrangement. This is the first Zionists that we're aware of, right? The first people who actively start doing actions to bring Jews back or to call for it publicly. The first Zionists in the modern sense are Christians. They're to blame, right? But not all the Christians, right? I don't think the Catholic Church's official position was this at the time. They're the majority branch, and many Protestant branches never thought this. But now this doctrine is called dispensationalism, right? If you want to be precise about the term, that this bid'ah idea, this innovated idea is called dispensationalism. So he starts up, but among the Jews, you wouldn't get, let me go to, among the Jews, you wouldn't get these kind of these kind of ideas concerning that Jews should rule Palestine until much later. So you get people like Zvi Hirsch Kalitcha, you don't need to remember the name, who talked about Jews going back to Palestine to just live there. So just to live in Palestine. So like, why don't we go back, many of us, not all, but we can go back there just to live in, at least we're living in our ancestral homeland. He didn't really have an idea that it would be, well, we must now like take over, but they did start to think that maybe the Messiah will come if more Jews are there in Palestine. The Jewish Messiah will come, because they didn't think Jesus is Messiah. So they're still waiting for the Messiah to come. You also have another Jewish group called Jewish Lovers of Zion, where they wanted simply to encourage Jews to go and live in Palestine, more Jews to live in Palestine there. Not necessarily, not to take it over per se. There were many people that was against this idea, and you had immigration into Palestine begin during the Ottoman times. So when the Ottoman Caliphate, the Turkish Caliphate, well, it's Muslim Caliphate, the Islamic Caliphate of the Ottomans, they let Jews into Palestine, thinking they just want to move. Why would they say no? It's like, well, okay, you want to become citizens of the Ottoman Caliphate, no problem. We're not going to say no. Welcome, as long as you're citizens, no problem. There were even Russian Jews, many of them fleeing persecution in Russia, and the Ottomans let them in. Sure, okay, come. As long as you're willing to be Ottoman citizens, no problem. Right? No problem, welcome. Right? What's the worst that can happen? Right, anyway. Then entered this guy, Theodor Herzl. You might have heard his name a lot. He is the leader of political Zionism, right? So he didn't invent the idea of Zionism. Zionism being that Jews should have an independent state based on their race, right? In Palestine, he didn't invent that idea. There were others, but he became the most vocal advocate. It's like Nelson Mandela never invented the idea that native South Africans should have equal rights, but he was the one that led it to its success, you could say. So that's, in essence, Theodor Herzl. He's an atheist. He's German speaker, atheist. Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, is an atheist, although he was around this time as well. All the advocates, most of the advocates were socialists and atheists. Socialists, by the way. Right? People often forget this. Ben-Gurion was head of a socialist party in Israel. So Theodor Herzl doesn't believe in the Bible. He doesn't believe in God. Most of the Zionists don't believe in God, because religious Jews at this time, the vast majority of them didn't think that Zionism was correct. They thought it was wrong. And do you know why they thought it was wrong? Because they thought only the Messiah can reestablish the state of a kingdom of Moses or a kingdom of David, reestablish it in Palestine, not us, because he has to be the king, right? So he'll come and be the king and he'll reestablish it. You can't do it before that, right? You can't do it before that. So the ones who created the state of Israel didn't believe in the Bible. They didn't believe in God. There's an Israeli Jewish historian who speaks on Palestinian rights. He's called Ilan Pappé, right? He's a good speaker for Palestinian rights and so on. He refutes Zionism, and he says the early Zionists didn't believe in God, but they did believe he gave them the land of Israel. Right, that's a little common joke amongst them. So Theodor Herzl just, even at the beginning, he says, actually, I don't even care where on the planet Earth we have a land, as long as we have a land. He wrote that maybe Argentina is a good place, because he said Argentina is a good place because there's more agriculture, farmland. It's very nice territory down there. There's a lot of water, agriculture, and so on. It's very nice land to settle in. He said Palestine was more desert, and there's problems there, and he said Jews are not acclimatized to the climate of Palestine anymore. Yeah, because they're white skin, right? They don't have the skin color of Middle Easterners that can adapt to the sun. So that's why white Jewish Europeans, like Boer in South Africa, have higher rates of skin cancer, right? Because they don't have nature's sunblock, right? Melanin, right? Melanin is nature's sunblock, right? Protects you from cancer, from radiation from the sun. Ultraviolet, ultraviolet, you know what? If you have some dirty water that's got bacteria in it, there's a good way to sterilize it, right? Leave it out in the sun for 1 day. It becomes clean to drink. All the sun's radiation will destroy all the bacteria and most of the viruses in the water, right? So the sun's pretty pretty rough, right? Anyway, so he thought Palestine is actually not a good place for Jews, for Jewish Europeans, The climate doesn't agree with them. It's harsh terrain, it's harsh climate for them. Argentina's nicer. But then he said, but Palestine has this historical, background to it that the Bible talks about. And many Jews believe in the Bible, or they view the Bible as a cultural book, right? So that it might be attractive in that way. So he actually didn't know where it would go. But his the biggest thing he does for Zionism is he creates something called the Zionist. Let me just this is I'm quoting for notes, but he creates the Zionist organization, right? In 1897, the Zionist organization. Now it's called the World Zionist Organization, WZO. And he gets all the different organizations of Jews, because Jews couldn't agree on many things. The Zionists couldn't agree. So he brings them all together and says, look, let's just talk to each other and talk about opportunities and possibilities and see how we can work together to give a land for Jews somewhere, anywhere in the world. Maybe Uganda. The British said, why not Uganda for you? Or Sinai. They thought maybe a part of North America they could go to, right? If they just get enough people there in a majority, they can control one state in America, right? But that never caught on. Instead, they'll say, well, Argentina was a very big prospect, and many Jews left to go to Argentina, right? There are many thousands of Jews left. Okay, Argentina, let's go. And then someone said, well, we think maybe Palestine has to be because of our cultural background and the book and all this kind of stuff. So at this point, they didn't actually know how they're going to get it. They just say, send people there, right? Send people there, right? Boertrekker, right? For Boertrek or something, if I'm getting that word right, wasn't it like the migration of Boers across South Africa to a new area? So let's do I don't know what the Dutch word or the Afrikaans word for Jew is, but doing a Zionist trekker, right, to Argentina or to Palestine, and see what happens. Just see what happens. Who knows? If we just get a majority there, who knows what we can do, right? So that was their first idea, and then they eventually World War I happens. Okay, Herzl dies, and World War I happens. I'm going to now go to right. Yeah, so World War I happens, and basically the Ottomans ally with the Germans. The Germans are not Nazis in World War I, by the way, just so you know, right? World War I, it was just nationalism, normal nationalism, if you can call it. Germans and the Austrians and the Ottomans ally and against Russia, England, France, and then eventually America. So the British control Egypt before World War I, and they begin to go onto Sinai. The Ottomans actually hold them back for a long period of time. But the Ottomans are fighting the British. The British try to conquer Istanbul. The Ottomans beat them out, push them. The British try to take over Baghdad, and they get beaten out. The whole army is captured. The British army is captured, while fighting the Russian Empire at the same time. Which is, our Russians said hundreds of thousands, millions of people there, and the Ottomans. They get pushed back, but they manage to reach a stalemate, and then they make an agreement, and the Russians stop fighting them. So the Ottomans were fighting multiple empires, the biggest empires or most powerful ones at the same time, all at the same time. But eventually, the British make a deal with the Arabs in the Hijaz area to say, look, don't you want to have your own state for your Arab peoples or whatever? Who cares about the Islamic Caliphate, right? It's mostly dominated by Turkish people. You guys should be ruling. So they said not all, but some of these Hijazis agreed to it, the people in Arabia, and they start fighting the Ottomans from behind the back, right? So the Ottomans are fighting the British, and they're getting these terrorist raids from behind the back, like blowing up the railways and killing civilians on these trains. Funnily enough, you could say the British taught the Arabs how to be terrorists in the Middle East. Actually taught them that, you can use terrorism against Islam, of course, right? Ottomans were imperfect, yes, but in theory they were Khilafah, and all Muslims owed them allegiance, right? You can't fight against them. So these, you could say, was was Khuruj or Khawarij, right? And ultimately, the British made a deal with the Saudis as well, the Saudi tribes. The Saudi tribe to ally with them, which the Saudis did as well. Anyway, okay, that's a different discussion. So then but the British Empire doesn't know if it can win the war against Germany. It doesn't know it can win. It's losing. Lots of manpower. Hundreds of thousands of dead British soldiers in Europe. Hundreds of thousands. How are they going to win? In 1915, 1916, and 17, they didn't know they were going to win. They had no idea they could win. So then the Zionists approached them. A guy called Chaim Weizmann and Nahum Sokolow. They use their connections. There's a rich guy. There's a Walter Rothschild is a rich member of the rich Rothschild family. Okay. Now, not all the Rothschilds supported Zionism. They thought maybe it couldn't work, but this guy said, "Look, I have a connection with the British government. I'll let you talk to them, see what happens." Right. So they go to the British. Huh? Okay. Is it? Okay, Salatam. Yeah. Okay. We'll let the British. We'll let you speak to them. And so he goes to speak to the British government, and he makes a deal with them. He says, "Look, we Jews all know each other. We all have networks. We can help you win the war if you give us the land of Palestine." Now, secretly, they actually didn't have that power to do that. But because Europeans at the time were mostly anti-Semitic, right? Sorry. They thought that was true. See, that's why I hate conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories give people more power than they actually have. So the conspiracy theory that Jews controlled the global media at the time and the banking system and so on. Yes, there were some very powerful bankers that are Jewish, but to say they all controlled this was actually false, because we know what they were saying amongst each other, we don't have this power, but let's pretend we do, right? And because the British thought the British government thought that was the case, they said, okay, let's make a deal with them. We'll make it a homeland for Jews. But the British were clever. They didn't say a state. We'll give it to you as a Jewish state. They never said that, right? That's important. We'll give you as a homeland if you help us, okay? And then the Prime Minister of England, Lloyd George, he writes in his memoirs, "We made a deal with the Jews of the world, world Jewry. We made a deal with the Jews of the world." Later on, Lloyd George would meet a young German politician who was rising up in the world, in German politics, called Adolf Hitler, and describing him as a nice guy when he meets them. Did they have a discussion where, he talks about, hey, you were in World War I. Oh, okay, I was the Prime Minister in World War I. You were in the German army. We won that. Do you know how we won that? Well, we made a deal with the Jews of the world to support us, including German Jews, and that's why you lost. That's why you lost. And did that conversation happen? Allahu Alam. But Hitler starts to think at some point, maybe before he thought this, I'm not sure. But he starts to say in all his rhetoric and arguments to the public that the Jews betrayed Germany after World War II. So did Zionism, that tactic, indirectly lead Hitler or give evidence to Hitler to think that Jews were behind Germany's loss? Allahu Alam, I don't know. I haven't found any evidence yet. I'll keep digging, but I haven't found any evidence just yet. But he seems to think that. And the Prime Minister he speaks to, the British Prime Minister, thought that, right? Allahu Alam. Okay, so then the British promised Palestine as a homeland to allow Jewish migration, and they make that promise called the Balfour Declaration in 1917. They hadn't conquered it yet, but then they conquer it, and then they allow Jewish migration into Palestine. The British at that point actually hadn't decided what they were going to do with Palestine, right? But after World War I, a proto-UN called the League of Nations was created, and the idea of the League of Nations was every colonial territory or empire was eventually going to be given independence, with the people that lived there being given voting rights, democracy, equal rights, everything, right? And the right to self-determination. You've heard this before in South African politics rhetoric, right? The right of the majority for self-determination. But what they said to each other is, maybe we deny this to Palestinians, right? So this is the first injustice against the Palestinians, is that they say every one of these territories we're going to create, the majority population will have equal rights for everybody, and let the majorities of these countries rule themselves or self-determination. But they say, except the Palestinians, because we have to let Jews go in there, as we made a promise to Zionists. We have to let them go in there until they become the majority. But the British didn't know if enough Jews would come to become the majority. So at this point in time, they were like, "We'll allow you to migrate there, but you Jews determine whether you guys can make it into a majority state for Jews or not." Okay, so this is where we're going to leave it here before the break. And of course, this denial of the Palestinians' right of self-determination as the majority would be the beginning of all the injustices that happened to the Palestinians afterwards.
Okay, Jazakallah. So inshallah, we're going to go for Salah. Salah is 1:15 in the masjid. And after that, when we come back, there'll be lunch, will be served. And we'll try to resume by about 2 or maybe 2:10, inshallah. Jazakallah. Stephen Bull.